Welcome back to Women in Westminster with me, Eleni Barrett. Today I'm delighted to welcome Alicia Kearns, who is a Conservative MP for Rutland and Stamford. As Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, she brings a wealth of knowledge in international relations and national security. With a strong commitment to supporting rural communities and improving health services, she's passionate about addressing the unique challenges faced by her constituents. And it's a pleasure to have you with us today to share your insights and vision for the future.
Oh, thanks ever so much for having me.
Firstly, a key focus area for you is foreign affairs. So what current international issue do you feel requires the most urgent attention from the UK government?
Sure. So as is the way of politics, no 2 days the same.
Right.
So although I was chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and then I was shadow foreign minister, in the last few hours I have now changed to being a shadow Home Office minister.
Oh, congratulations,
so
I guess.
Politics work. I will now be the shadow National Security Minister and also the shadow Safeguarding Minister. So what I'm really excited about in those roles is obviously national security is why I love foreign policy, because if we can't keep our people safe, if we can't keep our country safe, then we don't have national security. And without national security, you are fundamentally not delivering your number one job as government, which is to keep our people safe. So I'm really pleased because it brings all my foreign policy experience, because I'll be focused on things like, for example, counter-terrorism, so how do we keep the UK safe, counter-organised crime, how do we make sure that hostile states like China and others are not committing acts on our shores. So for example, Iran has been trying to conduct a lot of assassinations on British shores. And then the other part of my job, which I'm really you can't really say you're excited about it because it's a very depressing state of affairs, but it's essentially all about protecting women and girls from violence, protecting anyone who is vulnerable. So that's everything from child trafficking all the way through to domestic abuse, all the way through to all sorts of violence that we see against people, so male violence. So I'm really looking forward to having those two briefs. I've only had them a couple hours, but essentially how do I make sure that I'm holding government to account on the promises that they made when it came to those areas, but also how do I push forward my own kind of priorities and views. And these are both issues that I've cared about for a very long time, and I've done a lot of work on them, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, congratulations on the new job, Wow. What do you see as the most significant challenges facing rural communities like those in your constituency, and how are you tackling those challenges?
The biggest problem in rural communities is social mobility.
Right.
So essentially, if you live in a city and you are born into a more deprived background, the reality is that within 15 minutes of your house, either by walking or by public transport, you have a school, you have an apprenticeship, you have a library, you have a pharmacy, you have a doctor's, you have everything around you for you to lift yourself up out of the position you were born into, to give yourself every opportunity. But if you live in a really rural village, there might not be a library for an hour's drive. There might not be a bus to get you to that library. There may not be a school offering apprenticeships or T-levels or, anything other than traditional academic education. And so your ability to create your own future, to have that social mobility, is much, much lower. So that's the challenge. The other challenge is that obviously with the current government, we're seeing a lot of frustrations from farmers. We really need to understand that food security is part of our national security, and obviously as a Home Office Minister I'll continue to focus on that. Food security is really vital, but we won't have any farmers if they're forced to sell off generations of family farms to big corporations. So there are lots of concerns at the moment in rural areas, obviously public transport, making sure we support our communities to have that kind of social mobility, though it tends to be the main focus. But there are lots and lots of, flooding, for example, is another major issue for rural areas. Road safety, often we've got, dangerous roads, or we've got I've got the A1 going through. And then again, things like broadband and mobile phone coverage, which once again, all go back to social mobility and the ability to shape your own destiny, really.
And what steps are you taking to support agriculture and local business in your constituency, especially in light of post-Brexit changes?
Yeah. So one of the big things I did was I managed to secure £23.7 million from the government for something called the Levelling Up Funds. So we very much believed as government that rather than London saying that the best thing for Rutland and Melton at the time, and now Rutland and Stamford, is what we in London decide is best for you, instead we said, no, actually we should say to local councils and groups, tell us what you want to fund. Tell us what your communities need. And so, for example, in Melton, which was, the rural capital of food, I had a vision for transforming our ancient market into the borough market of the future. And essentially, because it's in the middle of the country, creating somewhere where everyone can come, where the whole country can come, enjoy food. It'd be good for our economy, it'd be good for our farmers, it'd be good for our local people, and it would also boost all of our tourism. And I was really proud that I secured that Levelling Up money because, as I say, it should create the borough market in the Midlands. I managed to get 2 new bus routes, and I also managed to find a way to create a new economy, a medical technology economy within our community. Also, I was able to get money to look after the new discoveries we made, which are these ancient marine lizard that some people call a dinosaur. It's not a dinosaur, but that's fine. So I've done a lot of that. I do a lot of fighting for our farmers. I spend a lot of my time, particularly after the recent budget, fighting against the changes they've made. And then supporting local businesses, whether it's running my Rutland and Stamford's favourite independent shop awards, so that people spend money locally and we celebrate them, all the way through to fighting to get them the support they need from government.
And kind of linked on to issues in your constituency, you've advocated for better health services in rural areas. So what do you believe is the most urgent improvement needed in healthcare delivery?
It's really difficult when it comes to healthcare. So I'm really pleased that I managed to get Melton a new GP practice. That's because they have the highest number of people in the country being served by just one GP practice. So 36,000 people served by one practice.
One practice?
But also 36,000 people, with one GP practice.
Wow.
Bonkers. Utterly bonkers. So I've managed to get them a new GP practice, which should open, I hope, next year. We've also got a new treatment centre coming to Stamford, which will allow essentially day surgeries to take place, which is great news. But we obviously need to reduce the pressure on primary care and also on urgent care. And the way we do that is obviously by getting waiting times down. I was really pleased that we were getting waiting times down as the government after COVID, but the impact on COVID was so enormous. But we also have a social problem where I have people ring me and say, I can't get a GP practice. There's no point me trying. I just won't get one. And I say, look, this is the way I want you to do it. I want you to ring at this time. And then I want you to go on the app at this time. And then if you haven't got an appointment by the end of the day, come back to me. And what I'm really pleased is when people do that, they get appointments.
Yes.
So we have a problem where people think they can't, but there are the appointments there. Our GPs are seeing, we've got more GPs than ever in history. We've got more GP appointments every day taking place in our communities. I think the average GP practice in my community is doing 19% more appointments than they did pre-pandemic. People don't think they are the appointments. But we also need to recognise as a country that pharmacists are incredibly skilled, nurses are incredibly skilled, and people always ask to see a doctor, but that's not necessarily who you need to see. But there's lots more I want to do on rural health services, and I'm going to keep on pushing. But I'm really pleased that we were able to make some real progress over the last few years.
Well, I mean, it's brilliant you're fighting to get better healthcare and more access to healthcare in rural communities. But what has your experience been like as a woman in a prominent position, both in politics and kind of foreign affairs? And what barriers do you still believe need to be broken?
So I think barriers definitely still need to be broken. I think what's really difficult is that in politics, women are so consistently demeaned and denigrated for our appearance. And essentially that empowers misogynists. So look, all MPs receive an appalling level of abuse. But with women, you see how much misogyny there is in the country. And the problem is that is being validated every time a journalist attacks a woman, a female politician, for how they look. So, for example, I've had journalists who have written tens of articles about me. I mean, literally, there's one journalist who's written about me 20-something times. He's never written about my brain. He's never written about my policies.
Really?
He's never written about my positions on things. He's only ever written about how I look, and never in a nice way. Never, ever in a nice way. And unfortunately, all that does is empower the misogynists. And we still have a massive problem in this country with misogyny. Look at how many women are still being killed by their partners. Look at our domestic abuse levels. And that low-level degrading of women on a daily basis essentially empowers all those people around the world. So we still have a lot more. We're heading in the right direction. We've had more women, record numbers of women elected. We've got important changes that allow a woman to take, maternity leave for 6 months, although you're never really actual maternity leave because you've always got some work to do. But we are making it to a better place. But at the same time, I've also had lots of men who've been my biggest supporters, and I was the first ever female chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, youngest woman to ever chair any committee, and there were lots of men who were fighting for me to get there. So there's lots of problems, but also the men are part of the solution.
And what advice would you give to women who are interested in pursuing a career in politics, particularly in areas that you focus on?
So what I would say is we need more women in politics. There is no question. But also in policy making, if you don't want to be the politician, you could be in the civil service, you could be a local councillor, you can be on the board of governors, you can work at a prison and on their boards. There's so much you can do. Together, we can be the change we want to see in the world. There is so much difference you can make as a politician every single day. And that's to people in your constituency who had every other door slammed in their face. They don't know who to go to. They don't know who to get help from. You can be that person. But it is probably the most difficult job in the world. And that's not to take away from people who have incredibly challenging jobs. But in terms of the abuse, the everyday assumption that you are a bad person, the time away from your family, the commitments you have to make, but the everyday abuse is significant. So I would say, look, it's a really hard job, but you can change people's lives, and that is incredibly rewarding to be able to do that both nationally and locally. So it's really quite something.
Well, I mean, you've just said how much of a difficult job it is, but when you need a break from the intensity of Parliament, how do you unwind or connect with your community back home?
It's something I'm not very good at. So getting home. So I cannot tell you the joy I feel when I step off the train. I then still have half an hour to get home, and you just want to get through that period. But walking into my front door is just the most enormous sense of relief.
I'm sure.
I love being home. I love seeing my children. I go upstairs, they're asleep in bed by the time I get home. But seeing them there, knowing they're safe. But the things that bring me joy are reading. I love reading, and then musical theatre. Any chance, and I think my current record since I got elected, I think I've been to the theatre twice in 5 years. But going to the theatre is my happy place, and seeing musical theatre. But otherwise, it's just being home with my family.
What's the best musical you've seen?
Oh, God, right. So Miss Saigon is one of my favourites of all time, and that is incredible. And I saw a production in New York with a helicopter on stage when I was about 8, and that was life-changing. But then you have, I saw a production of Top Hat a couple of years ago, which was just out of this world. And then actually, I forgot the Colour Purple. Seeing that was amazing. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to bang on one last one. I was in Halifax in Nova Scotia in Canada for a conference last year, and I landed, and there was a 7-hour time difference, and I was like, I've got to stay awake. I can't go to bed now because I'll wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, Canadian time. And so I was walking the streets of this town, and I was like, what do I do? I've got to stay awake, and I'm exhausted. And I suddenly saw that night they had a performance of Come From Away, which is this heartbreaking musical about the 9/11 planes that all landed in Canada after 9/11. I'd seen the production in London. To see it with a Nova Scotian Canadian audience, there were all these jokes that I just hadn't understood. There were all these kind of things I hadn't expected, and the joy of going to the theatre when you didn't plan it, and then learning more about a musical than you ever thought you would. But I just love all the musicals. Parade, you name it. I have a long list of musicals that bring me up. I'm that crazy woman that drives singing at the top of her voice around her constituency. But yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. That's all we got time to.
Not at all.
It was great to be able to speak with you.
Not at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Listeners, join us next week in Westminster, when I'll be speaking with Melanie